Hello everyone and welcome to 59 Gaming, your source for news and updates for everything gaming related. My name is Sunlight and today we will talk about Resident Evil. Resident Evil celebrates its 25th anniversary and Resident Evil Village is right around the corner. So we thought it's time to talk about our personal top 10 for the best Resident Evil games out there. For that I brought The Truth and the Masked Ningen on board. Say hello.
Yo.
Ohio! I love Resident Evil. Very, very good series.
Oh yes.
Very fun, very fun.
We all do. So let's not waste any more time and kick the list right off. So, number 10.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
Resident Evil, the original.
Yeah, so the original Resident Evil obviously was, I guess, kind of groundbreaking, considering like what the whole series led to. You know, then eventually RE2 blossoms from it, and then that was the one that really exploded things. And there's a bajillion copycat games from RE2, right? But RE1, is what all of this is based off of. I do think it is aged actually pretty poorly in comparison to RE2 3 OG or RE2 OG and RE3 OG, which is the reason why this is a little bit lower on the list compared to those ones, right? But you know, it still does have the two different playthroughs, you know, with Chris and Jill. That's something that a lot of these Resident Evil games do pretty well, is that you get, you know, sort of like different playthroughs, different endings. You know, for this game, you know, with Chris and Jill, you could choose to only save yourself, or you can go out of your way to go for like a perfect ending and save everyone. Gameplay, obviously, I've always loved the fixed camera angles and all that. It's definitely a very good game. Again, it's a little bit wonky, a little bit stiff compared to, I think, OG RE2 and 3, but still a very good game nonetheless.
Yeah, Ningen, you put it on your list too. Like we already talked about your top 10 list and it was a number 10 for you too. So any additional thoughts?
Yeah, so obviously it was the first one that I played. I don't know, I don't think I played it when it first came out, but I'm pretty sure I'd played it before number 2 came out at least. And it was pretty groundbreaking for me because I'd only really played like platformers and you know, like Sonic and stuff like that before that, really. So the fixed camera tank controls thing, I became a huge fan of that, like survival horror games springing from there, like really, really good. Obviously at the time it was more, I guess, funny than it was good quality, but obviously everybody remembers like the cheesy voice acting.
Yeah.
The intro was like the actual real life like video, and you had all of the cast members like making funny cool poses with it coming up with their names and stuff.
This.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that will always be the no. Don't open that door will always be a classic. So. So yeah, there's one of those things. I agree that it hasn't aged particularly well. I think out of all the ones on the list, it's the one I would probably be least likely to replay, just because the remake is so good. But yeah, it definitely hasn't aged great, but it is kind of where this all started from, and it's still, you know, if you can put up with bad graphics, like, well, I say bad, like old graphics and that little bit of cheese, it's still worth playing if you've never played it. But
that was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Save me!
Yeah.
Alright, yeah, with that said, let's move on to number 9. Resident Evil 5. So, I think nobody can deny that Resident Evil 5 is a great third-person shooter, but that's exactly the problem. Resident Evil 5 is a very good action game, but a bad Resident Evil from my point of view. The Adventure in Africa focuses way more on action and pretty much ignores what Resident Evil made great in the first place, like survival horror. Shinji Mikami himself once said that he will never play Resident Evil 5 because he would only get disappointed, but the whole arc with Wesker, the state-of-the-art Mercenaries mode, and the Lost in Nightmares DLC that shows that Capcom still can integrate the core element into the series, give us a good time, and I'm a big fan of third-person shooters anyway, so we had to put Resident Evil 5 on the list, but of course it's low. Any additional thoughts here?
I think it's just the game is very, very good if you're playing, I think, with someone else, but you know, it's not the best, I think, when you're playing alone. It's definitely something meant to be played with 2 people, right?
Yeah, the co-op in it works really, really well. And yeah, I would agree. That's how I summarize it. I really enjoyed playing through the game with my friend. We played through the whole thing like co-op. Managed to do it on the hardest difficulty, and it's really, really fun. And like the mercenaries mode in that game is probably the best. And I'm a huge fan of all of the side stuff. It's why I think the next game is even on my list at all. So the side modes are really fun, but it's exactly like you said. I think it's a really, really good co-op action game, and so if you like co-op action games and you haven't played it, it's worth playing. But yeah, it's just not really a survival horror game anymore, so to me it does feel a lot less of a Resident Evil game.
Okay, so let's move on to number 8, Resident Evil Revelations 2.
Yeah, so Revelations 2, this is what I was alluding to. This kind of only made my list because the raid mode in this game is so good. It's kind of like the evolution of the Mercenaries mode, but you can level up your character. There's different characters you can unlock to play as. There's a whole bunch of like crazy stuff, and they did online events with like raid bosses and all that sort of thing. So as someone who was kind of missing the Mercenaries mode, that was probably my favorite aspect of Revelations. Some of it was really good. I know it kind of strays from the Resident Evil blueprint a little bit because it has episodic style like story structure, but obviously being one of the later games, it's, you know, looks nice, got some interesting mechanics, and yeah, I'm just a huge fan of the raid mode, so it's pretty much that pushes it up my list a little bit over some of the older games.
Yeah, as for me, like, I'm not a big fan of this episodic format, and when the game came out, it had a lot of technical problems. The look wasn't great on the Xbox 360, it lagged, the loading times were huge, and yeah, I never got into it. Like, confession time, I never played it. Like, I really have to play it. I already bought the game, but all those things like made me not getting into it. So maybe Truth, are you a fan of this game?
So I actually have not played either of the Revelation games as well, both Revelations 1 and 2. The thing is, I've watched a lot of playthroughs of both of them, though. I actually, one thing I really liked about Revelations is, you know, all these Resident Evil games have come out throughout the years, but like Resident Evil 1 introduced the character Barry Burton, again, who is so cheesy, so fun, and then they take him out of the story completely for like 20 years, and then finally Revelations 2 brought him back. So that was like the biggest thing for me, was Barry getting another game I was always really excited about. So I plan on playing this soon on 5-9 Gaming, and I'm definitely looking forward to that, to play with my boy Barry Burton.
Okay, let's move on to number 7, Resident Evil Revelations. The title that came out originally on the Nintendo 3DS, and that's very important to me personally. Revelations came out on Nintendo's handheld first, and the experience was great for what it was. I had a blast with the campaign and was invested in the new characters the game introduced, but what really sold the game for me, and we talked about this earlier, is the raid mode. In this mode you had to fight through a series of maps, and on the ports that came out later for other platforms, this mode was heavily improved. The upgrading system and the overall challenge was so addicting for me personally. So yeah, Ningen, did you play the raid mode from the first title?
Oh yes, I did play the first one. One of the things I actually really liked about the first one was the setting. I kind of liked the whole survival horror on a cruise ship kind of thing. Right. But yeah, the raid mode, that was my introduction to that. And obviously in the second one it was changed slightly. The only thing I found disappointing about the raid mode in number 1 was the fact that the one of my favorite side characters in the series is Hunk, and you literally have to like 100% the raid mode to unlock him. Yes, so it's one of those things where you only unlock him once you've already done everything. But yeah, other than that, it was definitely fun. And like I say, that's what kind of led into my appreciation for the first one and the second one as well.
Okay, so let's move on to the next title, and yeah, here we are with number 6, Resident Evil 3 Remake.
So I am probably the biggest defender of this game out there. I think Resident Evil 3 Remake is really, really well done and actually very underrated. It's very disappointing because there's multiple huge sections that were cut. You could tell the game itself has many cut corners, right? Like, you know, a lot of assets were reused from RE2. I mean, the OGs were like that as well, where many assets were reused. But this game, it very much felt like it just wasn't, you know, completed. Nemesis was definitely not as, like, impressive, as intimidating as the original, or even as Mr. X was in RE2 Remake. But still, I think the gameplay of RE3 Remake is so tight, so good. The dodge mechanic, I think, was vastly improved and very superior to what they had from the original RE3 Nemesis, where even, like, top speedrunners, world record holders cannot consistently do the dodge in RE3 Nemesis, the original, because it's just so wonky and weird and inconsistent, right? I think the dodge is great. I think the gameplay is great. There's several things they could have done to improve RE3 Remake, you know, as such as, you know, not have cut monster sections, not make Nemesis as sort of like, you know, linear as he was, not like these huge sprawling sections where he's chasing you around and, you know, constantly wondering if every door you open is going to have him. But I just think the gameplay of RE3 Remake is so good. I actually like it a lot. And the past couple days I've been really debating in my head, do I actually even like RE3 Remake better than RE2 Remake? I think I might. So, again, I'm probably one of the biggest defenders out there of this game, but I definitely do acknowledge it does have a lot of shortcomings, right? It could have been maybe the best Resident Evil game ever. If they put the same amount of love into RE3 Remake that they did in RE2 Remake, I think it could have been the best Resident Evil ever. It is a shame, you know, in that aspect.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with that completely. It's actually, that was one of the fun things when we first started discussing this list to find out, because among my own friendship group outside of 5.9, I'm probably one of the only people that staunchly defends the 3 remake. I played it, it was around the beginning, I think, of lockdown in the UK.
Yep.
And so literally I downloaded it, and I think I played it for like pretty much 2 days solid, cleared it like 3 times during that time. And I loved it. It was one of those things where the OG 3 was always probably one of my favorites of the original 3. So I really enjoyed it. And obviously I do share those same, like, you know, it's a little bit disappointing that certain bits were cut. I think a lot of people complain about things being cut that they maybe don't remember as well, because like the whole Gravedigger section, I don't really care that that was cut personally. But yeah, I super enjoyed it, and then obviously went online after finishing it to see that it wasn't being super well received. And I know one of the things that a lot of people complain about is it came out alongside that the weird the isometric multiplayer mode thing, where it's like the handler versus the survivors. And I think a lot of people sort of came away with the impression that they should just never have made that, because no one was really asking for it, and just spent that extra time and resources bulking out the third one. But even with those shortcomings, I agree. I think it's really good. The gameplay is solid. It's just super fun. And yeah, I really enjoy it. So I'm glad that I'm not the only one.
Okay, yeah. So let's move on to number 5 then. Resident Evil 2 Remake.
Yeah, so 2 Remake is, you know, is fantastic. I think when it came out, seeing how well the remake of number 1 was made, but how long ago it was, I think a lot of people had high hopes for the remake of number 2. And yeah, it definitely delivered. Because it's always, you know, when 4 came out, there was that shift of moving, you know, onto the over-the-shoulder, slightly more action-based setup. And this kind of captured that great mix of having that playstyle, but still having the feel of a Resident Evil game. Everything about like the police station, all that kind of stuff, it was really nostalgic from the original version of number 2. And obviously one thing that was really good compared to the 3 remake is they kept in basically everything. So you had the Leon and Claire playthrough A, you had the B playthrough that obviously mirrors the opposite character's A playthrough, and they kept in the Hunk and Tofu extra missions as well. And then I believe there was like DLC, like standalone missions as well. So there was quite a lot of stuff included. And I think that's probably something that helps that just be slightly above the 3 remake on this overall list, because it's just packed full of so much stuff. And it was just super fun to play.
Yeah, for me personally, like I'm rating the remake higher than the original, but I'm one of the only ones. But that's because I actually love third-person shooters. Like, that's not like a third-person shooter. I would say it's a third-person survival horror game, and like that combined with the content from the original game, like they remade everything. Like, this is, in my opinion, the perfect remake. Like, of course we will get to the Resident Evil 1 remake I like even more, but they are on par, I would say. Like, I love this game. I love this game so much. So let's move on to number 4. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis.
Yeah, so as I was saying previously, I think this is possibly my favourite of the original 3. Whilst it is a little bit shorter overall than 2, and obviously only having the one character, that was the game that introduced the Mercenaries mode, although it was obviously very different to what it went on to be in 4 and 5. But I played it around the time that it first came out, and so growing from Resident Evil 2, which obviously did feature the tyrant in the B game, or Mr. X, Nemesis was so like intimidating to me, like on the first experience of playing it, because being fairly young when it first came out and not really understanding like game design and how game mechanics work, I genuinely thought it during my first playthrough that he could literally appear at any time. And obviously once he does appear, which I now know is in certain scripted areas, he does still follow you for a significant amount of time. So when you're playing that the first time, I really sort of got the impression that he could turn up at any time, which really added to the overall tension. And then compared to the second one, you get to see a lot more of Raccoon City. It's not necessarily like free roaming, but there's a lot of the city open to you, and there's a couple of bits where you have to go to complete a list of objectives, and you can do them in whichever order you like. So you sort of go off around the city and see different locations.
Yeah, this is one thing compared to the remake, is that the OG, it felt like you were exploring much more of the city, right? Whereas the remake, you were confined to a much smaller area.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, true. If you just finished Resident Evil 3 Nemesis on the 5-9 Twitch, any additional thoughts about this game?
I think it's great. It holds up really well. Capcom, they've done this mechanic with this sort of like boss monster chasing you through several of these, right? RE2 Remake has it, OG RE3, they even tried it out in Resident Evil 6, and it still feels, and I guess OG RE2 as well with Mr. X, but it feels to me like they did it the best in this one. Nemesis is very intimidating, he is very powerful, that grab of his is so cheap. It is very tough to fight him all the time. They did a really good job of balancing the game around this unstoppable killing machine on your ass the whole game, right? Very fun. So far in this little Resident Evil marathon I've done, that was the one I had the most fun playing, I think.
Very nice, very nice. And with that said, let's move on to the top 3, and that might shock some people that this title is at number 3, but yeah, there it is. Number 3, Resident Evil 4.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
I can't even tell you how many hours I put into this game, man, but you might be surprised that this title was not at the top of my list actually, but we all know how legendary Resident Evil 4 is. After Code Veronica X was released, it was clear that Resident Evil needed some changes, so Shinji Mikami took it upon himself to provide the necessary change, and if I say that it worked really well, yeah, that's an understatement. When this game came out on the Nintendo GameCube, it blew us all away. No more tank controls, fast-paced combat, and still a great amount of survival horror. It was so far ahead of its time, and it looked so gorgeous back in the day. It definitely changed the series and the genre as a whole. There's a reason why this title gets ported to every device. So, Truth, you put it a little bit lower on your personal list. Care to elaborate here?
This is a game I would acknowledge and say for sure that this is one of the best games of all time, right? I just think like the thing about this one, of all these Resident Evil games, I would say this one is definitely aging the best of all of them. It still looks good. The gameplay is still smooth. Like, Leon might be a little bit clunky feeling, but I feel like the game is just aging so gracefully. It's just me personally. I've always just preferred the gameplay style of, like, you know, Code Veronica, OG3, like that sort of gameplay style I've always preferred. But, I mean, RE4 is a really, really fun game. Like, once you start playing it, like, you can really feel just, like, the passion, I feel like, that they put into it. It's very good. I don't have really too much to criticize about the game. I mean, what can you, right? Like, it's very good. It even gave us Devil May Cry and stuff like that, right? Like, we're kind of like failed prototypes for RE4. So RE4 is the gift that keeps giving.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I remember seeing the was it one of the original like test demo trailers where it was like still third person and it was Leon in a castle with like ghosts and stuff, and obviously it went quite a long way to end up the game that it finally became. But yeah, it was something that I got on the GameCube when it first came out. People who never played the GameCube, you definitely missed out during that generation, because games like Resident Evil 4 and like Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes were easily better looking than a lot of like the top end PS2 games. It was a shame how underrated the GameCube is sometimes, but yeah, the game was amazing. The thing is, it switched to the over-the-shoulder and slightly more action-paced, but the reason why I don't consider it in the same sort of lower tier as Resident Evil 5 is it still really had that survival horror like feel to it, and obviously tied in quite well to the story. Yeah, it was just fantastic.
Yeah,
Okay.
RE5 really, you know, jumps the shark, right? I mean, RE4, Leon is ridiculous in RE4, but I think RE5 goes a little bit over the top, right?
Yeah, right. The whole border thing. Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's move on to number 2, Resident Evil Remake. Story time here. Resident Evil 4 was the first Resident Evil I ever played, and I had the opportunity to act as a commentator for Carcinogen's Resident Evil Remake speedrun at AGDQ 2016. At that time I only knew the game because of its speedruns and never played it before, and after a bigger talk with Carcinogen, I decided to play the HD port for the Xbox One, and it absolutely blew me away. For me personally, there is no other entry in the series that delivers the message behind the series as well as the remake of the original Resident Evil we had at number 10. It improved every aspect of the original, and it's a treat for your senses. For me, this is how you should remake a game. Resident Evil Remake is by far my favorite Resident Evil, and I am very happy that I got my game signed by one of the lead designers of the remake. I could go on for hours, but what do you have to say, boys? Ningen, take it away.
Yeah, I loved it as well. Again, good old GameCube bringing out some of these hot titles. Again, it looks really good, especially considering when it came out. And yeah, it kept that same feel. It's still third-person tank controls. I don't know if the GameCube version had it, but I know the Xbox version that I did actually re-download recently has the option for the slightly easier controls.
That's only on the HD version. Yep.
I see. Yeah. So yeah, I prefer the tank controls anyway. I've always liked that for the third person. But yeah, it expanded on the game a little bit as well, which I thought was cool. Like added a little bit of lore. There's also some cool stuff with the section in the crypt underground featuring the new character, and it mentions it actually mentions the parasites and stuff from Resident Evil 5. So. And it's because I think
there's actually a lot, because I just went through this. They added a note on Wesker talking about Birkin from RE2. They talk about Alexia from Code Veronica. Yeah, they get into the Nemesis parasite and then the Las Plagas from RE4. Like, yeah, they all, poured references to all of it all throughout the game.
Yeah. So I thought that was a really cool touch playing it through, obviously after having played those other games, that they kind of nicely tied it back around. And then, yeah, they didn't change a huge amount. They kept a lot of the fundamental stuff in there, but they made it a little bit different in certain areas, so it wasn't like a complete retread of the first one. I remember the first time I booted it up, I hadn't played the remake or the original in years, and I actually got lost in the mansion at the beginning for a little bit because of one of the new keys that they'd added that wasn't in the original that I couldn't find for a good amount of time. So it was really fun playing it all over again. They dialed back on some of the cheese a little bit, but they did keep in sort of little nods and references to some of the old cheesy lines. So obviously they wanted it to be a more serious overall, but it does have those little nods in it to the original for people that have been long-time fans of the series. So yeah, that's why it's definitely super, super high on the list for me as well. And just overall, an excellent remake. I think it shows that, I've said this before many times, I think if Capcom decided to release a Resident Evil game now with top of the line sort of graphics that was still a third person tank controls Resident Evil, I think it would do really, really well.
I would argue that this is the best remake of all time. This improves on the original in every single aspect without, they don't remove anything, they just add to everything. They make everything better in every way to the point where it, like, the original is like completely invalidated. I feel like another reason the OG Resident Evil is so far down in the list is that, like, you know, RE3 Remake is good, but it doesn't capture the full scope of RE3. RE2 Remake is the same, but the same thing. You know, many portions of the B section are cut, spiders are cut, you know, there's a lot of cut content from both of them. But the RE1 Remake, again, is just, all it does is add everything to it. Nothing is removed. I would say probably the best video game remake of all time.
Exactly. All right, it's time. We are revealing number 1.
Resident Evil 2.
Yeah, so this game is ridiculous, right? Like, again, you play original, like, RE1, like, it's good, you know, you see what they're going for, but, like, RE2, like, they improved at, like, everything. I would say RE2 has maybe one of the best video game soundtracks of all time, which I think really helps the game a lot. I feel like they kind of, like, made the game a little bit more serious while still at the same time kind of keeping some of the fun cheese aspects, but I feel like they balance it much better in RE2 than they do in RE1, right? You could probably say RE3 is a little bit maybe too serious, but like RE2, I feel like there's a lot of moments where it's just like, you know, we were streaming it and we're laughing out loud at some of the ridiculousness stuff, right? But it still is rather serious at the same time. Just the gameplay elements, the police station is great. I think the characters like Leon and Claire they introduced go on to be in numerous of the Resident Evil titles because they're just great characters. I think the game overall is just very memorable and very deserving of being number 1 here.
Yeah, it has a lot of really great aspects. The soundtrack, like you said, is one of them. I think anyone who's dabbled in the series but has played the OG version of number 2, the police station theme, like whenever you hear it, it's just such a great OST. But yeah, everything about the second one I really liked because it took what the first one did and then just added so much more. Like, it looks better. Obviously, it's not quite as cheesy, like, you know, better sound quality. And then it added all that extra stuff because, you know, in number 1, you could play as Chris or you could play as Jill. There were some slight differences, but their adventures were, for the most part, pretty much the same. And then number 2, when you first play it, it kind of seems like it's doing the same thing again, where both their adventures are very similar, but with some slightly extra separate bits. Like, obviously, Leon has all the stuff with Ada, Claire has all the stuff with Sherry, but then you complete it with one of the characters, and then you're presented with the B scenario, which, again, coming to, like, this was my first experience of the survival horror genre in general with Resident Evil. This was another massive thing that I'd never seen before, having this secondary playthrough that then mirrored everything that the other character had done in the first one. So you've got those nice little touches like the side pack and the submachine gun in the armory that you had to choose whether to take or to leave behind in the A game, directly affects whether it's there in the B game for the character that you're playing as. And then obviously introduced the Tyrant 103. I don't think he was called Mr. X in any of the UK like advertisement stuff, so that was something I didn't actually find out for quite a while after playing the original Resident Evil.
I don't know where the name first came. I swear the name might have actually come from the novels, like the sort of like novelization of the games. Like I don't remember him being like officially called Mr. X like anywhere for a long time, right?
Yeah, because all I remember was that initial cutscene where the canister gets dropped down off of the helicopter, and it has like a serial number on it that says T103, and I only remember that because all of my friends from like school, and that's literally what we just refer to him as Tyrant 103, because we had no idea what he was supposed to be called. But I remember the first time actually taking him down, leaving the room, and then I went back in because I wondered whether he dropped anything, and he was up and moving around again. And so playing that the first time, especially after having only played the first one, it just adds so much to that genre. And then obviously, again, they had the Hunk side mission, the Tofu side mission, which I don't know if either of you have ever actually beaten that on the original PS1 version, but it was ridiculously hard. And yeah, everything about it was just so good. And whilst, you know, you could argue that it's aged, and some people that don't like to play like games that are slightly older, I can see why you would maybe consider the remake of number 2 to be better, but I don't think it's aged badly at all. And like you said, it's still fun to play even now, so it had to be high on my list.
Alright, and there you have it. This is our top 10 for the best Resident Evil games in the franchise. Do you agree or disagree with our list? Definitely let us know in the comment section, and make sure to subscribe to Five Night Gaming to catch our upcoming videos about the best survival horror series out there. With that said, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Five Night Gaming, out.